because man is political by nature, we ask the question of how should we then live? It's early in book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, and we're talking about being happy. And Aristotle talks about political science, and when we talk about science, it means knowledge. He means political science, he means knowledge, and we're talking about knowledge of the city and how we should live. He starts to ask the question, what is government for? Is it to create virtue in its citizens? So I had you guys read book 1 and book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics. I want to discuss that. We've been discussing happiness. What role does the government have in creating happiness? Well, it just depends on what you think happiness is. Remember, I've been kind of pushing you guys to get rid of the belief that happiness is somehow an emotion. I've been pushing you to get rid of the belief that somehow happiness is an emotion or a sensation of joy or well-being. Because you could get drugs to give you a sensation of well-being. Euphoria. But that's not happiness, okay? One of the big things on, on the voting block is whether or not we should legalize marijuana. Well, I just want to be happy. And marijuana makes me happy, one might say. No, marijuana gives you euphoria. It gives you a sense of well-being. It's a drug. That's what it does. It doesn't necessarily make you have a good, virtuous life, which is required by Aristotle, at least, to have happiness. Aristotle talks about happiness having to do with a complete life, having to do with a virtuous life, having to focus your goals towards the ends. Now, when we talk about the ends of finality, we don't mean like it's over. We mean purpose, okay? What is the purpose of something? And he talks early on in book 1 about purposes. What is the purpose of bridle making? The end of it, he'll call it. Horsemanship, right? You don't make a bridle for a bridle's sake. If there were no such thing as horses, you'd never make it. But you want to ride a horse, so you need something to steer the thing with and to stop it. Get the horse to stop running and bucking and doing, you want to control the horse. That's what that's for. It has an end, a purpose. All right? Generalship has to do with victory. Victory itself has a purpose, especially in the political and world stage when it comes to, war. We have enemies, foreign and domestic, who want to kill us. And so we have a military. We don't have a military just for the sake of employing people. It'd be ridiculous. You have a military so that you are either preventing war or obtaining victory in war. So that our men are not killed, our women are not raped, and our children enslaved. For victory. So that your rights will be protected. From enemies, foreign, that is. Yeah, police for domestic protection of your rights. That's the end of them. Okay? Cameras are made for what? Shooting pictures and recording things. And we record those things for their own purposes, for teaching or entertainment. What are you as a human? What type of thing is a human? What is your end? What are you for? What is your purpose? Because that is the fulfillment of your purpose is what is going to determine whether or not you are happy. What is your purpose? Are you instrumental in that? Now that's not a rhetorical question. I'm not going to give you the answer. Well, Aristotle kind of gives you the answer. Did you read it? I want you to tell me. No, you didn't read it. We're going to talk a lot about, how this goes about, what it would take to be happy. If virtue is what it takes to be happy, we got to ask the question, how do you become virtuous? Okay, and we're going to do that a little bit today. Can anybody tell me what your purpose is? You're humans, right? You've been living a certain number of years. Nobody has taught you what you're supposed to be or do in your whole life. Can anybody offer anything? Is this a really hard question?
Preach the gospel?
Yeah, I would see that as certainly a command, the Great Commission, right? Is preaching the gospel instrumental, or is it intrinsically good? What is an instrumental good?
Something good because it's useful.
It's useful to obtain something else. Why do I preach the gospel?
So the gospel can live on. So like prosper and sweet generation.
Is it for the gospel? So what is the gospel? The gospel just means good news. Okay? Evangelion. If you are someone who talks about the good news, you're an evangelista, which is an evangelist, one who tells people the good news. What is the good news? The good news is, starts with the bad news, that all men have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? Because of sin, we've been separated from God. And we cannot bridge that gap on our own. We cannot get into God's good graces on our own, because it's like running a stoplight. We've run a stoplight and the cop pulls us over, and we say, well, I stopped at all the other ones. Yeah, but you didn't stop at that one. You got a blemish on you. And to come into fellowship with the perfect God, there needs to be justice. And your sin is generally paid for. How do you pay an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? So if you kill somebody's cow, what do you owe them? A cow, right? If you steal $1,000, what do you owe? $1,000, right? It's called Lexus Talionis. It's retributive justice. You owe that which you destroyed. Maybe even a little more for punitive reasons, right? But when you sin against the Almighty God, the greatest conceivable being, can a simple human sacrifice or human life pay the debt? The answer is no. You've sinned against something, God. You've sinned against God. Thus, it would require that great of a sacrifice. So God reveals himself in his Son, Jesus Christ, the man, fully God. Because he's man, he could pay the sin. Because he is God, he has the clout to do it, right? So as the unblemished sacrifice, the Jews used to offer up lambs. God offers up the Lamb of God, right? His sacrifice for us. That if we believe in our heart and confess with our tongue that Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, then we will be saved. And that is the good news. That if we believe in our heart and confess with our tongue, right, that Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead. He did so because we sinned, and he did so to reconcile us. That's the gospel. Now, we do have a purpose, yes. Does that fit with what Aristotle says? Maybe. To a degree, okay? What is a human? What kind of thing is a human? We could, I might embarrass myself by not fully doing this well. We have types of things. We have types of objects, right? And we have, inanimate objects, right? What's an inanimate object? Rocks, desks, right? Pencils, those are inanimate. They are not animated. Okay? Then you have a certain animated thing, soul type things. You got, we could call these plant souls or animal souls, stuff like that. But you got animate, and you've got actually got animate and inanimate. I think you've got, let's do it. Like I said, I was going to embarrass myself. I think it's living and non-living. I apologize. I'm gonna, and you got your professor on video getting it wrong, so keep in mind, we're not all perfect, okay? And then, you know, with the non-living, obviously, those are all probably gonna be inanimate things, okay? But with living, you've got animate. And inanimate. And even still, I might be wrong. I'm gonna have to go consult my notes on this, but with the inanimate, you might have plant life, okay? Trees and stuff like that. It's living, but it's inanimate. It doesn't animate itself. You got the animate, then you got non-rational, and then you got the rational. All right, rational, animate, living objects. Man is a rational, animate, living object, okay? What do I have in common with a rock? Well, we're objects. Rocks are objects, okay? What do I have in common with a dog, which is a non-rational animal? You know, dogs, cats, bears. I can just put down mammals, fish, lizards, whatever. But we're mammals, so I guess that's not right. Because that'd put us in the non-rational. Dogs are not rational, but we are animate living objects. That's what we have in common with them. All right? What does that mean, though, to be a rational, animate living object? First of all, we have reason. And what do we do with reason? Humans are rational animals. That's what we are. What does rationale play in our end? Well, what is reason? The ability, not just to gain knowledge. Animals have some sort of first order awareness of facts. I eat this, I'll be full, right? But what animals lack is second order reasoning. What is second order reasoning? Second order reasoning happens to do with thoughts about thoughts. A few years ago, people used to go, oh dude, that's so meta, right? You know, meta tends to mean before. So it's like we ask questions about questions. We ask things like, what is man for? Dogs don't ask that question. Dogs ask the question, if there were a dog question, where's my food? Is this soft? Is this warm? Will I get my tummy rubbed? Right? I need to go to the bathroom. I hit this bell. You know, if you had the little jingle bells on the door, the dog comes up and knocks it. The dog, you're like, hey, dog's annoying me again. I gotta let him out. All right. So, you know, but they don't sit there and go. They don't go through the trash, eat it, get scolded, and they go, that was a very bad thing to do. They go, I got spanked for that. I don't want to be spanked in a way, and they don't put it in language. And they may or may not do it again. Okay? But one thing humans do is not only do we reason about things like that, we ask the questions like, what ought I do? What is virtue? We reason towards virtue. We reason towards purpose. We reason towards morality. We do not live merely by our appetites. We govern our appetites. Animals live by their appetites, whereas humans govern their appetites. Some of you will be in relations one day with other people, and you will ask the question about fidelity. Should I go out with this other person? Let's pretend you're married. Some dude asks you, or well, it could be a guy asking you, whoever, asks you out on a date. And you're married. You say, sure, of course, why not? You're good looking. Is that what you say? Is that what you would say? Why not? Because it is what? Do you not understand the question? Just pretend you're married and somebody else asks you on a date. What would you say?
Yes.
You'd say yes to a date, you'd cheat on your husband?
Oh, no.
Okay. Why not?
It's wrong.
Why?
I'm married.
Yeah, so?
I wouldn't want to be with another guy if I'm married.
What if you did want to be with another guy while you were married? Would it no longer be wrong? It would still be wrong, even if you had an appetite, a desire for that, right? You saw another guy and you're like, oh my gosh, that guy is so handsome and so nice and so, right? And you're like, and he asked you out and you're like, but I'm married, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do, right? If you're a dog, do you think you're having that question? Do dogs get married? No, they're not moral beings. Marriage is not just a legal state, it is a moral state, right? Animals don't think like that. Humans do. Why should you be married? And why should you, I mean, really, marriage seems like it's keeping you from having fun now, right? Maybe you should just stay single, correct? Or should you be married? Is that the right thing to be? Should humans strive to create families? Not just offspring. Families, where there's a dad, a mom, and a child or more. Is that the right thing to do? The virtuous thing to do? Now I'm asking you this, I want to know a couple things. I want to know, what separates humans from animals. And it's moral reasoning. I'm still asking you your purpose. What is your purpose? Yeah, to spread the gospel. I think that's our purpose, one of our purposes. For a higher purpose, that we should have a fellowship with God. And I'm going to argue, and I'm not just going to argue it, I'll tell you that you're one step off. Okay, Thomas Aquinas is going to suggest happiness, the end of happiness is God. Okay? The goal is God, ultimately. The gospel is instrumental in God getting us there. But we're not there yet. We're at Aristotle. And, I mean, obviously, God still existed back then, and that purpose really did exist back then, too, okay? Except for the fact that Jesus had not yet been born, okay? We're still trying to figure out, if we were just to look at a human, what type of person, or not person, what purpose it is. What do you exist for? We exist we're thinking things. That's what Aristotle would say. We reason. But what do we reason towards? And I would say virtue, right? But virtue is a way that we ought to be. How do you determine how you ought to be? You don't know. But you know marriage is a good thing, would you say? And you'd say you ought not destroy it. Or girl, for that matter. However you want to destroy it. You can destroy it any number of ways. Trust me, there are plenty of ways to destroy a marriage. It doesn't have to do, right? So you would suggest that that's a good thing, okay? Okay, good. How do you know that? How do you know marriage is a good thing? Let me tell you, there are people out there actively trying to destroy the nuclear family. actively right now by their political dealings, we'll call them, they are literally trying to destroy it. They believe that it is a patriarchal invention designed to enslave women and other races. Okay? And their goal is to destroy marriage and recreate the family differently. And lest you find that weird, just go listen to what's happening in politics right now with the cancel culture, the transgender agenda. Biden is about to have a council right now on gender. All of that has to do with marriage, okay? How many people can be in a marriage? Can I be married to myself? Why not? Be great.
I'm sure you
I'd split the date every time I went out. Right? I'd always get what I want. Right? I wouldn't have to argue with anybody. I'd always agree with myself.
Perfect relationship.
So, it all comes down to definitions. Let's not. I'm making an absurd statement that is, believe it or not, something that somebody has already gone and gotten a marriage certificate for. Can I marry a Ferris wheel? Look at you. You're laughing. This has been done. Can I marry a porpoise? It's been done. It's been done. Where are the breaks? Where are the rules? Can I marry as many women as I want? Can I have an open marriage? Date as many as people? Is that still a marriage if I'm dating and married?
I think so. I mean,
What is a marriage then? And what is it for? See, we always go back to what it's for, okay? But keep going.
I would consider a marriage, but because people are different, people think differently, everyone's not gonna have the same definition of a marriage, because honestly, anything goes these days. So
Okay, so one of the problems we're having is definitions. You're correct. So when I use the word marriage, we're speaking of two different languages, aren't we? Do you remember the word I used, univocal? Where we use the same term for the same object, that when I say desk, I mean that, I don't mean that. And if I say desk, you mean that, and I mean that, we're talking about two different things. Would you agree? So we're not talking about marriage, there's a type of definition called a nominal definition where you're just making use of the word. Some use marriage to say, a relationship between a Ferris wheel and a person. Others use it to mean a contract between two individuals, right? Others mean it to be a conjugal relationship between a man and a woman created by God in order to procreate, create what's called a family, right? And to rear offspring, okay? That's generally the one you grew up with, okay? So there are all sorts of definitions now. We want to know how we should use the word, okay? Because they're clearly not the same thing. I wrote an article on this. It actually was used in a Supreme Court case over same-sex marriage, okay? All right, so we're talking about two different things here. If you're talking about same-sex unions and you're talking about conjugal marriages and using the same term, you're confusing it because you're talking about two different types of relationships. They're both relationships, but they're not the same type. My best friend and I, we're best friends, but we're not married, but we are in a relationship. It's just like animals. We're both animals. A dog and me are both animals, but we're not the same kind of thing, are we? You can call it, I'm a rational animal. Dogs are non-rational animals. They're two different things. Okay? That's why we make a distinction between animals and people. You call a dog a person, now you're confusing the subject, right? They're not rational animals. So you're right. Depending on how you define it. And I wrote another article on how liberals abuse language, and it's how they make use of definitions and terms in different ways to pass legislation that enforces certain amoral norms. Okay? All right, so we're getting back to what are humans for? We are reasonable things. We're rational animals. We are thinking things. That's what we do. we think towards virtue, and we think about marriage, we ask the question, how ought it be? Okay, we look for the design for marriage. We don't look at, okay, and I'm not talking the word marriage. Talking about when I look at this and I go, I just walk up to an object. Point the camera at it. I come up to this and I go, what is this for? What is this for? I'll give it a name, but what is it for? Somebody? Nobody knows? Yes, go ahead. What? It looks so, yeah, and there are reasons for this. I'm using my mind to reason that this has a design in order to put things in, because it contains things. And it has a type of bag that seems to have been designed to keep things out or in. The smell in, right? Right? And the stuff in. And we take it, okay? We look for design. Okay? What is its purpose? Okay, you can follow the camera back here. So when I go to a couple, then I go to a man and a woman who are living together, and they are creating children and rearing these children. I go, what are they for? And I look at the relationship, and I ask what it does and what it does naturally, not artificially. Then I call it a marriage. And then some guy, follow this again, some guy walks over here and goes, we want to be called a marriage too. I want to be called what that thing is. They're two different things. A man and his garbage can are called something else. Why would you call it the same thing? Now, if you start with the objects, then you name it. Based on its purpose, you would have univocality. You get the purpose for what that thing you were talking about is for. And thus, somebody else coming in and breaking that apart would be destructive of the ends or the design of that thing. Therefore, it would not be a virtuous thing. That would be a vicious thing. A vicious thing would be destructive of the ends, the design. But anything that actually tends to help it with the ends, fosters that relationship, keeps it whole, keeps those children healthy and raised so that they could do the same, so that they could fulfill that end, that would be virtuous. Does that make sense? That, being married to that, would not be constructive towards those ends. That would actually be quite deviant. And that's not me insulting, it's just saying it deviates from the ends of actual marriage, of the man-woman conjugal sense of marriage, if that makes sense. Okay? So what is man for? We are rational beings reasoning towards the virtuous, towards our design, towards our end. Anything that is makes you deviate from that is vicious. It's vice. We call it sin. Aristotle goes on in book 1, he talks about politics being the highest order science, the highest order knowledge, I just said, because somehow he believes that government should aid us in a way towards our end, right? Should government aid us towards virtue? Whether you believe it or not, certain people do, and they believe that their views of virtue ought to be enforced by the law. That's why we have same-sex marriage, because they believe that the courts need to enforce their view of morality, their view of sexual morality. And that if I say, I disagree with that, I think it's immoral, they will call me a homophobe, and that I will somehow maybe cross a line, a legal line, in which I can be punished. Therefore, they can enforce their view of this. There was a time when homosexuality was actually illegal, okay? And if you were caught committing sodomy, there were anti-sodomy laws, and you'd be prosecuted based on those laws. Lawrence v. Texas is a case that got rid of those laws. Okay? So there is, whether or not people want morals to be enforced through law, it actually is or not. And it depends on what morals you believe should be passed. Now, let me tell you something. If you're not active, somebody else is going to be. Okay? All right. We're talking about the proper function of man, because for man to be happy ultimately is that he is properly functioning in the manner by which you have been designed, that end, by fulfilling the end, your purpose. Okay? Can a child be happy? Well, according to Aristotle, no. Why not? Well, first of all, he hasn't really had a chance to, he's not making use of full reason. Okay, they're not mature individuals. When I was your age, I was still making very foolish choices. Very foolish choices. You guys are probably ahead of me in this regard. At that point, how old are you?
19.
You're 19, and how old are you? 19? 18. So I was in the Marine Corps at that point, acting like, praise God for the Marine Corps. Because they straightened me out a lot, but I was acting like an idiot. Okay? I thought life was a party. And it took God's redemption getting a hold of me to change my life. But let me tell you something, I was not happy back then. Even if I was living what seemed to be a life of pleasure, I was not happy. Much happier once God got a hold of me. And I started recognizing purpose, real purpose in my life. Okay, until then I was floundering, searching. So now, there are two types of virtue that Aristotle talks about. Man is we want to fulfill virtue to become happy, right? We want to be virtuous. And there are two types. There's the intellectual virtues, and then there is the moral virtue. Okay? Now, the intellectual virtues can be taught. I could teach you all sorts of things, and you could learn about goodness, and you could learn about morality, and I could teach you these things, and you can listen. It's like weightlifting again. Sociopaths and psychopaths know that murder is bad. They just don't care. Rapists know rape is against the law. They know those whom they rape are not enjoying it, that they hate it, that they are in great fear, and that they could go to jail. They don't care. They have an intellectual sense and recognition of right and wrong. You could say, do me a favor, put all the wrong acts, you just write down a bunch of acts. You say, put all the good acts in this column and put all the bad acts over there, and they could do it intellectually. Thieves can tell you that theft is wrong, especially when it happens to them. Holy moly, the irony. Watching a thief get ripped off and listen to him cry. What's the problem, though, is that they don't have moral virtues in the sense, and how do we have moral virtue? How do you become morally virtuous? You have an idea how?
Actually perform the acts that are actually good and bad.
Yeah, it's going just back like to the weightlifting, right? And when do you have to start this?
On your own time, whenever you choose.
Can you do it?
Depends on if you do it.
Well, according to Aristotle, what did Aristotle say? This has got to start in the youth. This has got to start when you're a kid. And you don't do it. You do not do it. Your parents do it, and that is the value of parents. If you have nobody to raise you, you have nobody to guide you morally, and if you have nobody to guide you morally, then you're on your own and you don't know what you don't know. They can tell you don't do this, but all they mean is don't get caught doing this, right? Look at what, oh man, I look back at my childhood and I go, it is amazing. I intellectually could have been tell you that the stuff we did was wrong, but I could tell you I was not practicing it, and it took practice and later self-discipline. But to become a real virtuous person, it starts at youth, where mom and dad say you don't hit others, you don't take from others, you don't hurt others for your own pleasure, right? There are certain pleasures you abstain from. There are certain things you should want and certain things you should not want. And they correct you. And how do they correct you? When you do it, they punish you. That is, when you do the wrong thing. And when it's sad, it's kind of like an animal, right? But you condition your child to do the right things. And ultimately what ends up happening is you start to enjoy. You start to literally take pleasure in doing the right thing. I get a lot more fulfillment from giving a gift than receiving one. A lot of us, if you are a person who is a greedy person, you strive to take and not to give back. You strive to have without putting out, right? That's laziness, by the way. It's another vice. But if you were properly trained in virtue, you will realize that the fruits of your labor, anything you have, if it is the fruit of your labor, is much more pleasurable than anything you got from the fruits of other people's labor. Does that make sense to you? How many of you have worked for something in your life? I know people who literally haven't. Absolutely have not worked for a single thing in their life and have much more extravagant stuff than I have, and have absolutely less regard for the things they have that is much better than the things I have. That they get the best of everything when they get it, and they've never worked for it, and they do not appreciate it like I appreciate the things that I have. Because the things I appreciate are the results of my labor. And I can take joy in knowing that. And that when I give, I can give out of what I have. And I'm not taking. Does that make sense? If you have right upbringing, your parents will condition you to learn to give, to create, to build, to do your own work in order to fulfill certain other virtues so that you could give, so you could be charitable. Anyway, with that said, those are the two virtues. You have the intellectual virtue which must be taught, and then you have the moral virtue which must be conditioned. And the conditioning must take place when one is a child. You look at those people who are in prison now. The overwhelming majority of them had no father figure. Did you catch that? The overwhelming majority of those in prison had no father figure, thus no moral teacher. Some of us are lucky enough to have coaches and teachers and or big brothers or neighbors, dads, somebody to govern what we did, to give us, to inspire us to something greater than what we were, and then we practice it. And you know, when you practice something, let's take weightlifting, for example. You don't start off naturally really super strong. I mean, there are people who are gifted as strong, right? But you're not fulfilling your end, your ability when you first start. When you first start, you're quite feeble compared to what your potential is. Okay, your actual kind of stinks. In wrestling or jiu-jitsu, what I do, you tend to start off really kind of awkward and unskilled, and you get tapped out or pinned a lot easily. And it's very difficult. It is difficult. That's the point. And in moral training, it is difficult. Why is it difficult? Because your desire is to do something else. And thus it takes training, just like weightlifting takes training and dedication, and these hard skills like martial arts take training and dedication through the difficulty to condition yourself to a point where it is natural, where it just comes to you. It's kind of like driving down the road. When you first started driving, you're like, oh my God, getting on the highway, driving 2 miles an hour, aware of your foot on the brake, aware of your foot on the gas, aware of the fact that you don't know where the blinker is, aware of not, being awkward. Now you just drive down the road talking on your cell phone like, you've been there before, right? You're going to turn, you're either going to turn on the blinker or not, but you know where it is, and you just bank, do it. That's how it goes, condition, all right? It's a lot harder than that, though, given the fact that we're still sinful. Any questions? We didn't get all the way through book 2, but we're going to get to book 2 and we'll talk about the golden mean, all right? Have a great day. I will see you on Wednesday if you come. If not, look out for the videos. There are more up today.